My rich uncle invited me on his private jet. This isn't Coach Don't Touch a Thing, he snapped. The pilot checked my ID and the screen turned red. Alert Valkyrie asset. Passenger requires full security. 2 F-22s rolled onto the runway. The champagne flute on the table wasn't just shaking. It was vibrating with the kind of deep chest-rattling bass that triggers a primal fear in your gut. My uncle Marcus, a man who prided himself on controlling every room he entered, was gripping his leather armrests so hard his knuckles were white. Outside the oval window, the sky had turned into a nightmare. A silhouette, distinct, lethal, and impossibly close, banked hard against the clouds, its afterburners glowing like angry eyes. It was an F-22 Raptor, the apex predator of the skies, and it wasn't just passing by. It was hunting us. Marcus was screaming into the intercom, demanding to know why we were being targeted, convinced his pilot had strayed into restricted airspace or that a coup had started without his permission. The cockpit door burst open, but the pilot didn't look at Marcus. He was pale, sweating, holding an iPad that was flashing a terrifying shade of crimson. He bypassed the man paying his salary and looked directly at me. "Sir, you didn't tell me we had a Valkyrie-class asset on board," he stammered, his voice trembling over the roar of the engines outside. He turned the screen toward us, the red security banner reflecting in his terrified eyes. "Had just grounded us. That escort isn't for you, sir. It's for her." Uncle Marcus spent millions on this Gulfstream G650 to feel powerful to separate himself from the common people he viewed as ants. But as the F-22 seconds screamed overhead, reminding everyone that true power isn't bought, it's sanctioned, he realized his money meant absolutely nothing compared to my clearance. To understand how he ended up detained on his own tarmac, stripped of his dignity and his ego, we have to go back to the dinner invite where he made the biggest mistake of his life. It happened a week earlier at a family gathering that felt more like a corporate merger than a meal. My uncle Marcus, a pompous defense contractor, lobbyist who truly believed he ran the world from his country club membership, had summoned us to discuss his daughter's destination wedding. I was sitting at the far end of the table, nursing a glass of water, trying to remain invisible, a skill I had perfected over years of being the disappointing niece. He looked down the table at me, a smirk playing on his lips, and offered me a seat on his private jet. But like everything with Marcus, it wasn't a gift. It was a transaction designed to make him look big and me look small. "You can hitch a ride, Elena, but there are rules," he announced loudly, silencing the rest of the table so they could witness his benevolence. "Don't bring that beat-up duffel bag you always drag around. And try not to embarrass us in front of my investors. Just sit in the back, keep your mouth shut, and don't touch the single malt." The table chuckled, a polite, obedient sound. To them, I was just a low-level logistics clerk for the State Department, a paper pusher who couldn't afford a commercial ticket. They had no idea that my beat-up duffel bag contained encrypted hard drives that could topple governments. I tried to decline or at least warn him without breaking my cover, knowing exactly what kind of trouble this would cause. "Uncle, I appreciate it, but I have travel protocols." I started trying to explain that my movement required specific security clearances he didn't possess. He cut me off with a wave of his hand, dismissing me like a waiter who got the order wrong. "Stop pretending your little government job has protocols, Elena," he snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're flying with me, or you're not going at all to my family." I was simply poor Elena, the cautionary tale they whispered about over shrimp cocktails. My cousin Jessica, the bride-to-be whose entire personality was curated for Instagram, treated me less like a relative and more like a charity case she could feel benevolent about. At the rehearsal dinner, she made a show of asking if I could afford the dress code for the reception, loudly offering to lend me something from last season that might fit my frame. Uncle Marcus chimed in right on cue, cracking a joke about my 10-year-old sedan, asking if the engine was held together by duct tape and government prayers. They laughed, a synchronized, wealthy sound that made my skin crawl. To them, my modest apartment and lack of designer labels were proof of a life wasted pushing paper for a government that didn't pay. I smiled and took a sip of my water, swallowing the sharp retort that rested on my tongue. They didn't know that my poverty was a carefully constructed operational cover, a necessary camouflage known in the trade as being a gray man. If you look important, you become a target. If you look like a logistics clerk who struggles to pay rent, nobody looks twice. In reality, I am a chief strategic analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency, specializing in high-value target extraction. I don't book flights or file travel vouchers. I authorize Tier 1 extraction teams to pull assets out of hostile nations before the borders close. When I disappear into a windowless basement for work, I'm not sorting mail. I'm entering a sanitized SCIF environment, biometric scanners, reading my retinas to grant access to Cybernet terminals where a single keystroke can reroute a drone strike or burn a spy network. I looked at my uncle who was bragging about dodging a parking ticket, and I thought about the decision I made last Tuesday to extract a compromised family from a safe house in Damascus. The silence I kept at the dinner table wasn't submissiveness. It was the disciplined silence of a woman who carries state secrets in her head that are worth more than Uncle Marcus's entire investment portfolio. But the worlds were about to collide and the friction started with a phone call. I stepped away from the table to answer a secure line. It was Colonel Viper Ricks, my commanding officer, a man with a voice like grinding gravel, who viewed civilian life as a chaotic liability. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Elena," he growled, the line crackling with encryption static, "we're seeing movement on your tracker. You know the rules." "I'm visiting family, Colonel," I whispered, turning my back to the dining room. "You are currently holding the decryption keys for Operation Black Sands in your head," he countered, his tone dropping an octave. "You are a walking vault. If you go off-grid for more than 60 minutes, the Pentagon assumes you've been taken. Do not get on any transport that hasn't been vetted. I don't care if it's your mother's minivan. If we lose your signal, we escalate." He was right. I was a walking national security risk. Hopping on a private jet with a man who treated flight laws as mere suggestions was a tactical nightmare. But I was tired of the fighting. I wanted just for once to be the niece who didn't cause a scene, to just sit in the back and let them have their day. So I decided to compromise. I opened the secure portal on my phone and logged a movement request. I typed in the tail number of Marcus Jet and marked the trip as civilian transport. Low visibility. It was a digital failsafe. A breadcrumb trail telling the Air Force, "I am here. I am safe. Do not panic." I assumed quite naturally that Marcus's pilot would file a standard flight plan. If both our records matched in the system, the military tracking software would see a green light. I underestimated Marcus' greed. I didn't know that my uncle, in his infinite arrogance, planned to fly off the books to save a few thousand in landing fees and taxes. He was going to run a ghost flight. No manifest, no transponder squawk, no record. He was about to take a jet carrying a Tier 1 intelligence asset and make it disappear from the grid completely. He thought he was being clever. The United States Air Force would think he was kidnapping me. When I walked onto the polished concrete of the private hangar, the sharp smell of jet fuel mixed with the familiar suffocating scent of my family's disapproval. Uncle Marcus stood by the stairs, eyeing my carry-on. A reinforced tactical bag containing a secure satellite phone and encrypted drives like it was a bag of dirty laundry. "Jesus, Elena," he sneered, loud enough for the flight crew to hear. "I told you to travel light. Stash that garbage in the galley. You can sit in the jump seat next to the coffee maker." I climbed the stairs, keeping my head down, moving past the plush cream leather recliners reserved for his business partners. It was the same dynamic as every holiday since I was 12. Allowed in the room, but only on the periphery. As we taxied, I heard Marcus holding court in the main cabin, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "I don't file standard manifests," he bragged to a heavy-set investor clinking his glass. "Keeps the government out of my business and saves me 10 grand in fees." I told the pilot to file a ghost plan. My blood turned to ice. A ghost plan meant flying dark. No official record, no correct squawk code. To him, it was clever tax evasion to the Defense Department algorithms. Tracking my location, it looked exactly like a hostile extraction. I stared at the back of his head, calculating the sheer magnitude of his stupidity. If this plane took off with me inside and the transponder didn't match the log ID just filed, the automated defense grid wouldn't see a niece going to a wedding. It would see a Tier 1 asset being moved off grid at 500 meters an hour. The system doesn't ask questions. It neutralizes anomalies. I could have stood up and screamed, explained that he was about to trigger a national security incident, but I knew Marcus. He would just laugh and tell me to go back to my corner. So, I didn't scream. Instead, I slid my phone out of my pocket, shielding the screen from the flight attendant. I pulled up my encrypted chat with Colonel Ricks and typed a message that would change everything. "Civilian transport vectoring non-standard. Squawk code likely invalid. Do not shoot us down. Just intercept." I hit send, watching the encryption lock confirm delivery. Then I reached into my pocket and found my keys. There was a small, unassuming black fob next to my apartment key. It looked like a garage door opener, but it was a panic beacon linked directly to the nearest military command post. I ran my thumb over the plastic, and I remembered every time Marcus had interrupted me, every time he'd told me I didn't understand how the real world worked. I pressed the button until I felt the silent tactical click. He told me to sit down and shut up because the adults were talking business. He didn't know that with one press of a button, I had just invited the entire 1st Fighter Wing to our location. The engines of the Gulfstream were whining to a crescendo, pushing us back into our seats as the jet began its taxi toward the main runway. Uncle Marcus was already halfway through a celebratory scotch, his laughter booming through the cabin as he recounted a time he bullied a senator into submission. I sat in the jump seat, my hands folded calmly in my lap, counting down the seconds in my head. 3, 2, 1. The aircraft didn't just stop. It lurched violently as the pilot slammed on the brakes, sending Marcus' crystal tumbler flying off the table. The cabin went deadly silent for a heartbeat, broken only by the frantic, terrified voice of the pilot crackling over the intercom, stripped of all its usual customer service polish. We have a situation back here," he stammered. "Troy just locked us down." Before Marcus could even unleash his indignation, the air around us seemed to shatter. A roar louder than anything a civilian jet could produce tore through the fuselage, rattling my teeth and my skull. I looked out the porthole just in time to see the twin vertical stabilizers of an F-22 Raptor screaming past us at low altitude. It was a show of force so violent, so undeniably lethal that the investors in the plush seats actually ducked. Outside, a fleet of black SUVs swarmed onto the tarmac like angry beetles, cutting off every escape route. "What is this?" Marcus screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I'm a platinum donor. Get my lawyer on the phone. They can't do this to me." He didn't understand. He thought this was a misunderstanding about taxes or flight logs. He thought this was a game he could win with a checkbook. The cabin door didn't open. It was breached. Armed Air Force security forces, defenders wearing tactical gear and carrying rifles that weren't for show, stormed up the stairs. They didn't knock, and they certainly didn't care about the thread count of Marcus' carpet. Marcus jumped up, his instinct to dominate taking over. "Now listen here. You can't just barge onto a private." A defender shoved him back into his seat with one hand, a motion so casual it was insulting. "Sit down, sir. Hands where I can see them." Then the chaos parted. A man walked onto the plane, moving with a different kind of energy. It was Major Vance, a field officer I had briefed on 3 separate operations. He scanned the cabin, his eyes sweeping over the cowering investors and the sputtering uncle. Until they locked onto me, he didn't see a niece in a jumpsuit. He saw a superior officer. He snapped to attention, his salute razor sharp in the cramped space. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through the panic. "Command, received your beacon. We have a Valkyrie alert active on this vector. We cannot allow an asset with your knowledge base to depart on an insecure, unvetted civilian craft." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. Marcus stared at the major, then at me, his brain trying to reconcile the logistics clerk with the woman being saluted by a field-grade officer. "Her," he sputtered, his laugh nervous and high-pitched. "She's just a clerk. She sorts mail. Arrest her for wasting government time." Major Vance turned to my uncle slowly. He looked at Marcus with the kind of cold, professional detachment you reserve for a hostile combatant. "Sir," Vance said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "Step back or you will be neutralized. This individual is a protected national security asset. You are currently interfering with a federal operation." Neutralized. The word hung in the air, foreign and violent in Marcus' world of boardrooms and golf courses. The pilot who had been cowering in the cockpit doorway finally stepped forward. He was holding his iPad, the screen glowing with a bright red no-fly order. He looked at Marcus, his eyes wide with the realization of just how badly they had screwed up. "Sir," the pilot whispered, shaking his head, "look at the authorization code. It's Yankee White. She outranks you. She outranks everyone on this plane." In his world, money was the ultimate trump card. But on that tarmac, he learned that clearance is the only currency that matters. Major Vance gestured toward the open cabin door with a difference that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I unbuckled my seatbelt, the click sounding like a gunshot in the silent cabin, and stood up. I didn't look at the investors who were currently trying to blend into the upholstery, and I didn't, but look at the pilot who was staring at his instrument panel as if praying for a rewind button. I walked past Uncle Marcus, who was still spluttering about his rights, his face a mask of confusion and impotent rage. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to shrink away from him or apologize for my existence. I simply walked past him like he was a piece of furniture, an obstruction that had been cleared. I stepped out onto the metal stairs and the cool air of the tarmac hit me, carrying the scent of burnt kerosene and ozone. Waiting for me at the bottom wasn't a shuttle bus or a rental car. It was a Gulfstream C-37A painted in the stark authoritative gray of the United States Air Force with a star and bars emblazoned on the tail. It was a bird designed for one thing: moving people who matter to places where history is being written. A security detail of 4 defenders formed a perimeter around me, their movement synchronized and lethal, creating a corridor of steel that separated me from the civilian chaos I was leaving behind. I climbed the stairs to the military transport without looking back, leaving the poor relation narrative on the tarmac along with my uncle's impounded ego. The aftermath was catastrophic for Marcus, unfolding with the slow, crushing inevitability of a glacier because he had attempted to fly an unlisted ghost flight with a classified Tier 1 asset on board. The federal government didn't view it as a tax dodge, they viewed it as potential espionage and trafficking. The logic of the investigation was cold and binary. Why would a defense lobbyist hide the transport of an intelligence analyst unless he intended to sell her or her knowledge? He was detained on the tarmac for 48 hours, interrogated in a windowless room by agents who didn't care about his country club membership or his net worth. His precious jet was impounded for a forensic counter to intelligence sweep, a process that involves tearing the interior apart to look for listening devices, meaning his custom Italian leather seats were likely sitting in a heap in an evidence locker. He missed the wedding, of course. While his daughter was walking down the aisle in Aruba, wondering where her father was, Marcus was trying to explain to the Department of Justice why he thought federal aviation laws were optional. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had spent years excluding me from family events, making me feel like an outsider who wasn't quite good enough to make the cut. Now, the system he claimed to master had physically removed him from the most important day of his daughter's life. All because he couldn't show a basic level of respect to the person he sat next to. 6 months later, I was sitting at my desk inside a skiff, a sensitive, compartmented information facility deep within the bowels of the Pentagon. The air was recycled and cool, humming with the sound of server banks and the quiet murmur of analysts directing global operations. The mail clerk dropped a physical letter on my desk, a rare occurrence in a world that runs on encrypted digital bursts. It was from a high-end law firm in D.C., printed on paper that felt thicker than the bedsheets in my first apartment. It was from Marcus' lawyer. The letter wasn't a lawsuit. It was a plea. The investigation had spooked the Department of Defense, and Marcus' security clearance, the lifeblood of his lobbying career, was under review for revocation. He needed character references. Specifically, he needed a reference from a current government official with equivalent or higher standing to vouch for his patriotism and lack of malicious intent. He was asking me to save his career. I held the letter, reading the desperate, polite legal jargon, and I thought about the kids' table at Thanksgiving. I thought about the time he made me park my rusting sedan 3 blocks away so it wouldn't be seen in his driveway during a party. I remembered the way he looked at my shoes, my bag, my life, with that sneering pity that cut deeper than any insult. He had spent 30 years treating me like a liability, a smudge on his pristine reputation that needed to be hidden away. Now he needed the logistics clerk to sign her name, a name that carried more weight in this building than he could ever purchase to give him back his livelihood. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound clinical detachment. I walked over to the heavy-duty shredder in the corner of the office, the one rated to destroy classified documents. I fed the letter into the teeth of the machine. I didn't watch it disappear. I just listened to the satisfying rhythmic grinding sound as the plea for help turned into confetti. I had established a hard boundary, one enforced not by emotion, but by the reality of our respective stations. I wasn't his niece anymore, not in any way that mattered. I was the entity he feared, the quiet professional who held the keys to the castle he was locked out of. I grabbed my jacket and walked out into the main corridor of the Pentagon, the heels of my boots clicking against the polished floor. 2 generals passed me deep in conversation, and they nodded with genuine respect as we crossed paths. I nodded back, feeling the weight of the badge on my lanyard. This was my family now. These were the people who judged you on your competence, your reliability, and your honor, not your bank account. My uncle wanted to teach me a lesson about my place in the world. I'm just glad the United States Air Force was there to help him find his. Real power doesn't need to scream to be heard. If you've ever been the quiet professional in a room full of loud egos, let me know your story in the comments.